Okay, tell us how you started homeschooling in the first place and why.
Okay. Well, this goes all the way back to 1981, and we had an almost 1-year-old at the time, and we were in the car driving home from something, and on the radio, this was in South Carolina, which is where we lived at the time, something came on about them taking a family to court to take their kids away or something because they were homeschooling. And we were getting out of the car. You know how you have these times in your life where it's just stuck in your memory, you'll never forget that moment, where I'm walking, I got Alexa and I'm walking around the car, and I said to him, "Did you hear that? That was terrible. How horrible to not let your kids go to school." And his response was, "Oh, I thought that sounded like a good idea." So I was horrified because I was an education major. So all I could think of were these films we had seen of the really poor country dad sitting on the porch with no shoes on, and how he wouldn't let his kids go to school. And it was just this picture. And I really did see a film like that. Did you say
I
you
did
did
too.
too?
I saw that.
So at that time, it started this discussion of education. And as I said, Alexa was not even a year yet, probably about 9 or 10 months. And right after that, it wasn't long, I think Raymond Moore, who was one of the fathers of homeschooling, he had just published a book called Homegrown Kids. And he had some previous books that were related, Better Late Than Early and School Can Wait. But this was his first real homeschooling book. And so he was on a lot of the talk shows. He was on a talk show back then called Phil Donahue. He was on Focus on the Family. He was on 700 Club. And everywhere I turned, there was Raymond Moore. And so I thought, well, this is interesting. So I went to the library and I said, I want all your books on homeschooling. And they had one book, and it was John Holtz, who was also another father of homeschooling, but he was the more secular side. And I checked it out, and between what I was seeing on TV and reading the book, I just thought, this is what I want to do. This sounds great. This is the path we're going to be on.
When I heard it on the radio, I thought it was a really good idea. I hated school, and I wanted our kids to love learning. And so my thought was immediately, this is how we can love learning. We can let them chase down those rabbit holes when they want to explore deeper. We can do things that are interesting that help them learn at the same time. And so to me, it just made a lot of sense. I thought, oh, that's a really good idea when I heard it on the radio.
Well, something I want to add is I think the things that drew me to it are different than maybe a lot of people today who have bad experiences in public school. Because at that point, our kids were so far from school, we weren't pulling them out. But it was that developmental learning and having my children, Alexa at the time, be able to learn as she goes, as fast as she wants to or as slow as she needs to. And that individualized education just seemed, it was so true, knowing, because I learned it in education, and that and the lack of peer pressure and just to be able to be with family, those things just really connected with me. And I wouldn't say I loved school, but I was good at school. So I was successful. And so I had a completely different experience than Spencer did, whereas he hated school. So we, different, but I also realized that I learned for the grade. I didn't care if I ever learned anything. I wanted to make A's, and if it took memorizing that material for the test, then that's what I was going to do. And so if I learned something along the way, which I did, then it was a byproduct. It wasn't the goal to learn. It was a byproduct of making the grade. Whereas Spencer loved learning. He didn't care about the grade, and it was obvious. So
Debbie and I were in the Navy, and we took a long 30 days of vacation throughout Europe. And we were in Vienna. And there were lots of big government buildings in Vienna. And Debbie asked me, why does this little country have all these big buildings? And I said, well, this is the capital of the Ottoman Empire. And she said, what is the Ottoman Empire? And I said, you didn't learn that in school. But again, she was memorizing enough to make an A, and I was making C's, but I was learning stuff while at
And she
school.
probably got an A on that test,
She did.
but she didn't know what it was.
So I think that was the difference and there were times that when I was in school where the teacher would hit a subject that I wanted to know more about, but I couldn't learn more about it because we had to go to the next class.
How did you actually start? Where were you and when you started, and did you know other people who were homeschooling?
Whoa. Well, considering the fact that my oldest wasn't even one, that is a very slow, long story. But basically, at first, it just meant that we kept her home from things like we didn't do preschool, mother's morning out. She was home. And then we had number two, and we were just living life with two preschoolers. So there was not really any homeschooling going on as far as academics. It was more, and also when we got started, one of Raymond Moore's things was better late than early, or delayed academics, readiness learning. You can call it all of that. So I was very anxious to get started, but knowing what I felt was best for the kids, I was patient. So I was reading a lot of books about, education and as everything that would come out on homeschooling. There's a few came out through the years of those preschool years. So it was just natural learning, encouraging that for the preschool. Then we get into the trip to North Carolina. So I was in South Carolina back then. So when Alexa was an old 4, and then Scott was 2, and I was pregnant with Levi, number 3, we moved to North Carolina. And at that time, it's hard to answer this question without starting to get into the NCHE story and the law. Is that fine? So we moved here. Spencer had a sales territory, and it encompassed the north part of South Carolina here, where Rock Hill. So at that point, they were putting people in jail in North Carolina. And we knew that. We had heard the news. We knew that. And at South Carolina at the time, at least I had a little bit longer, and we knew more about the South Carolina situation, felt more comfortable with it. And we tried to buy a house in Rock Hill, right over the line from Charlotte, and it just would not work. And knowing what I know now, looking back, I just go, God just kept that from working, because he wanted us in North Carolina. I firmly believe that. He wanted us in North Carolina. So we said, okay, God, I have a 4-year-old. She's almost 5. Compulsory attendance is 7. I have 2 years to make this work, to figure out what to do. And we laugh now that we talked about, well, if they start to put us in jail, then Spencer, you're going to jail, and I'm going out the back door, and I'm going to drive to Tennessee with my mother. Of course, we never got close to that. We were very blessed and fortunate right after we put a contract on our house, and about a month before we moved into the house, about a month, what came down, and it is in the history stories you might have heard, is the Del Conte case. It is like the big thing in the homeschool history, is the Del Conte case. And the Del Contes were a family who were taken to court, and they went through many court trials, winning and losing and appeals, and it just kept going on. And we weren't here for most of that, because right there in May of '85, Del Conte's won the last and final decision by the courts that a homeschool qualifies as a private school under the North Carolina non-public school law. It is a non-public school. So before I even got to compulsory attendance, we were fine. And then we moved into our house, and a week later, we went to NCHE's first real conference in '85 when Raymond Moore was speaking. And at that point, we joined NCHE and, got involved. Back then, there were so few of us, so few homeschoolers in North Carolina, that we were all involved. If you were a member, you were involved. And by the time we got to the next conference, I think I was speaking and working on speakers. And it just went on from there.